be walking us through that?
Yes. So we recently developed the part-time open enrollment policy on in May of 2018. And that was as a result of some changes in the state legislation. It was, we have no revisions to that policy, so I would fast track that it's been reviewed. Are there any questions about that?
I don't.
No.
The next policy is Start College Now, and the Start College Now program replaced youth options, and it was part of the replacement for youth options. And Start College Now allows students to take courses at the technical college. Because of when it was put in place, the youth options program was still in existence. There are references to youth options in this policy. Since we're reviewing it and the students who benefited from youth options are no longer part of the system after this school year, the fast track is recommended to take out the youth options references.
I'm good with
Other
that
than
one.
that, there's no changes. Are there any questions?
No.
The next one is early college credit, and similarly, we had a course options as well as youth options program. And again, it's taking out the references to youth option. Early college credit allows students to take courses at a four-year institute, and that's the big difference between Start College Now and early college credit. It is also the funding that goes with that. So the changes recommended are the removal of the references to youth options, as well as the exception of physical education, because students benefiting from this in the future, it's not necessary in there, and students benefiting from this program in the future will have physical education counting towards their graduation credits, or counting in their GPA.
No way is Hallie.
Yeah.
Any questions about that one?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, all right then.
So the next one that I have in front of me is policy 452. And 452 is about student wellness. If you recall earlier, we had the policy that we removed that was
Is it
regarding
showing already,
district wellness,
Yes.
which was added in the curriculum section.
So if I
This
put it on,
policy
if I put it on
is in
here,
reference to
I click
student
on that,
wellness,
it's
and we
gonna
do
bring up
need
a
to have a
calendar.
student
And then I have
wellness
to click on
policy.
that day, which is today is
This is
27.
directly from
And then I have
WASB's
both the
recommended
meetings on there,
policies.
Yep.
and then I just click on the tab that says
We've
something like
actually
the
had
ladder.
this on the
ladder one,
agenda
and
a
then it'll
number of
give you an
times
option
for
to join a
policy
meeting.
committee, but never actually discussed it.
Like an example online.
Oh, I think I understand.
As you review this policy, are there questions or comments from the policy committee members?
No questions here.
I don't have any.
No.
The district wellness plan is, we'll be working very closely with Abby Padilla, who is our food service director, and she has some really nice drafts of that. That will be part of the AR in the future, but once we have the policy passed. And the district wellness plan is very much a comprehensive plan, which involves a lot of our stakeholder groups.
So this will be a recommendation for adoption to the board. We can't fast track this one because it's new, correct? All right.
Cannot be fast-tracked.
Cannot be fast tracked. Okay.
The
Right.
next, go ahead.
Nope. Proceed.
The next policy that we're ready to discuss is policy 823, the procedure for the release of records. And Tim Harder is going to lead us through that discussion.
All right, good evening, board members. So this policy actually has two parts. It's 823 And then we have 823.1, which is the exhibit that goes with it. We are recommending only changes to the exhibit portion of this overall policy. And then once we go through this, we will also need to address the administrative rule as a team here. The administrative rule goes back to 1982 and references costs that we can charge for copying and so forth. And so it's still in the old typewriter style, so we're going to definitely want to update it at a certain point in time. But really in the exhibit, we're asking for 3 changes to move forward with this. The first part is explicitly calling out that this policy will be posted on the district website. Our normal process is to post all policies on our district website also, but we would reference this on any posting about how I make an open records request to the West Bend School District. The second policy change would reference down in area 6 in the exhibit, would also call out the fact that the community member has the ability to ask for a digital record, and that's based upon change in case law that we've seen around open records where a member can ask for the original content or the original file type of the email. So they now have that right, or that right exists, and there's case law that is built around that. So we may not need to produce physical paper copies to people in the future then. We can provide that in a PDF form, or if somebody really wants the original MBOX file or EML file or whatever actual digital file that the original file was in, they can ask for that also. The third change is just explicitly calling out who is considered a local public office in terms of under public records law. So instead of calling out certain administrative staff here and certain groupings that may not exist in our titles, we tried to really clear it out to say basically it's board members, it is the superintendent, all district level administrators, principals, assistant principals, and athletic directors. So those are the 3 changes that would exist within the exhibit if moved forward.
All right, questions for any committee members?
None for me.
I didn't know that we even had exhibits as part of policy. I guess I didn't pay attention to the reason this is called exhibit. It's almost like an appendix of the actual policy.
Yeah, Joel, it's one of few that actually have that, and I think it's tied to the exhibit that you would give to somebody who actually makes the open records request in terms of this is all the different details that go in it. It's not the same as an administrative rule. They really are tied hand in hand. One references the other, but they carry a little different weight than an administrative rule at that point.
Yeah, and this actually is what gets posted.
Yes. So there's the policy behind it, then this is all the things that they can do making the request.
Do we actually have this exhibit posted in prominent and conspicuous places throughout the district?
I can't speak to that because I haven't walked around and looked for that, but I think that would be one of the processes as we update this. We would ask that it is posted in certain buildings at certain, or in our buildings in certain places, if we so choose.
So Tim, just a question on item 6, the digital copy of such records.
Yep.
I agree. I think that's a good add. Let me just ask a question. Are there records that the district keeps that are mostly in paper? Meaning, if somebody came in and wanted a copy of a stack of paper, and that's all we had was paper, so it's that thick, and they wanted a digital copy of that, I interpret this as saying if they want a digital copy or they want a reproduction, it's their choice. Is that okay? Is that what we intend? Just wanted your thoughts on that.
Yeah, if we had the ability to scan it, we could so choose it. A lot of it has to do with, a lot of the change though, Chris, has to do with that, the intent that I could ask for the original email. The case law is really around that. But we would, in that case, if it is paper, we could scan that and send it out. Or we could say no such digital record exists. Here, we can make a copy of the paper copy for you. We still have some records that are on microfiche yet, sitting in I think they're up somewhere in a safe in this building or at the high school where we may have but no choice to provide you with an actual paper copy to get that at that point in time.
Okay. We're equipped for any of those circumstances.
Yep. And if we have a case where we don't have the equipment on site, we will then have to go to a vendor to be able to do that, partner with our public library or various different ways to look at that. So.
Great. Okay. Hearing no other questions, I think we will, this would be, let's see. These are ads. Would this be a fast track? Let's see. look to see here. Now, we are adding some items here. Let's see. I think this could be a fast track. We're really not taking anything away from this. Any objection to that as a fast track? All right.
No,
For fast track adoption.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Laura, the next one is, let's see. If I've got my here correctly. Let's see. 823. Oh, proposed deletion of board policy 345.3 homework. Is that the next one on the agenda?
Correct. So
Okay.
we have talked about this at a couple of different policy committee meetings. And originally, we brought it forward for revision. Then the discussion we had was at that board meeting. To summarize it, we talked about, is homework something that needs to be regulated by the board? And does the board need to have oversight over homework? And so we were challenged to consider the deletion of the policy versus the revision of the policy. And one of the asks you had was about what would be communicated in school handbooks if we did not have the policy. And one of the concerns you had was about specifying the amount of time. And the other concern you had was about there being too much homework, where kids are spending too much time in addition to the school day, but you didn't want to relegate the exact amount of time. So I have a clarification to the policy that you read, that is posted and in board docs. And so I want to walk through that with you and talk with you about that. So the first 2 pages fully are part of the original policy. On page 3, the black section really should have been crossed off, because the recommendation from administration is, if we're going to have a policy, we recommend revising the policy to be in line with what WASB has. And so what you see in red is and red underlined is the WASB recommendation. The page 3, the top portion of that, before the big gap, should have been struck through, and I apologize that it was not. So what, in really thinking about how we've had multiple discussions on this and kind of have gone back and forth on delete or not delete. If the policy committee felt compelled to keep the policy, I would recommend what is underlined in red as the new policy, or as the revised policy, excuse me.
So between the choices, would it be administration's recommendation to delete the policy in whole and not replace it? Is that, I guess, Laura, is that your first choice?
I do think that it probably would be best for us to retain the policy as recommended to be revised in red. And my reason for that is we don't really have consistent things in our current school handbooks, and the homework policies really vary. And this would ensure that that homework is following these guidelines.
Go ahead, Mr. Kirby.
The one question I have is in number 6,
Yes.
in the red. And I know there's a difference between homework and other classroom expectations. Oftentimes, those other classroom expectations turn into homework. And so that to say that no more than 10% of the student's final grade will be based on homework, I understand that if it's just truly homework, but there's a lot of portfolios and things that take place that truly are more than 10% or should be more than 10%. If we want kids to demonstrate their mastery level of learning, a lot of that comes outside of the classroom, presented in the classroom, and that 10% makes me a little nervous because there's so many things that are outside of the classroom that could be perceived homework, or they could be perceived just an outside activity, but it really becomes homework because it's not done in the classroom.
Yeah, that was the one point number 6, like Superintendent said, was the one I was just gonna ask a question on. Similar concerns. Necessarily bad to have more than 10% of your grade count. Kind of makes me wonder if we should just delete that one line. I do like having the policy, and like you said, Laura, that if we don't have a lot outlined in our student handbooks and things, that maybe we keep the policy for now. This was one I believe I looked up in WASB, and I think WASB said that not a lot of school districts, or not all school districts, even have the policy. So I guess I wouldn't be totally opposed to deleting it, but I do like some of the bullet points that are said in section 3, especially, that we can't just assign homework just for fun. It's got to be developmentally appropriate. It's got to be meaningful. Homework shouldn't be a punishment, that sort of thing. So what's in there I like, although maybe strike item number 6.
That is the current practice, and I'm not sure how long that's been the practice for, because it preceded me in the district. That 10% homework doesn't count for more than 10%. But so, what I'm hearing right now from Superintendent Kierkegaard and President Ungert, Ms. Dove and Mr. Zweigert, are you in agreement on that, striking number 6?
Yeah, I agree with striking number 6. I think a lot of times kids are working on a big project that is maybe 20% of their grade, and it ends up coming home with them. And so, yeah, that concerns me a little bit.
I agree.
Anything else on that policy?
You can call me Joel. I'm a first name basis kind of guy. Even when we're on the computer, just call me Joel.
Yes, sir, Mr. President, sir.
Yeah, right.
Then, Laura, it sounds like the recommendation would be to the board, this would not be fast-tracked, to change this policy to the red language, except for the last item, item 6, referring to the homework and the 10%.
Correct.
Okay.
So we'll revise that and bring that forward for the full board consideration at the next regular board meeting. Not tonight, but.
Sounds good. All right, let's see. The next item on our agenda, is revised board policy 615, disclosure of financing and total cost of all referenda. And Andy Sarno is on the video call.
Yeah, thank you for this opportunity. We did, as noted, and there is one attachment. I do have up on my screen an additional, language and formatting that between Mr. Zweigert and I kind of worked on, and you have seen both of these. It was originally presented back on February 24th. Original policy dates back to January of 2012. But for consideration and in an attempt to be transparent on all aspects of a referendum, financially speaking, disclosure of information related to that above and beyond just the dollar amount of the debt issuance. That is the intent. Again, the attachment that you have, and I'm gonna see if I can't present right now just to see if, whoops, let me do that, cancel that. There we go. So on my screen, if you're able to see that while it's loading up here, this is the additional language that Chris and I were working on. I think it did clarify, and we can get this posted within board docs, just so it can be public. It was back when we originally discussed it. But really, it's just making sure that we're doing our due diligence with the community and that they have access to the information, not just the dollar amount, but also interest, what effect that will have on taxes, or what expected based on certain assumptions, because we are still making some assumptions when we create and share this information. It's an estimated interest rate. It's an estimated mill rate, but just sharing that information with the community. Interested if there's any additional dialogue at this point in time.
So Andy, when I look at this, the changes, for instance, in the opening paragraph, the parentheses, really doesn't change the meaning. It cleans up the wording. To section A1, I would say the same thing. A2, A3, they're all really small wording changes for clarification purposes, but nothing really changing meaning as far as I can see. In paragraph B, let's see if I've got this here. Major assumptions.
We did take the tail end, and again, the one that I'm showing on my screen right now, we did take the tail end of the original number 4 and 5 and resubmitted that into a B and a C.
Got it. Okay.
Main character. So B was the previous 4, and then C is the original 5. So essentially just coming up with the major assumptions and whatnot and disclosing what all of those are, cleaning up the language with the red strike throughs as well. So it's not in the original policy, but really identifying or estimating what a likely tax impact or what the mill rate would be based on the assumptions. I could even see, I think there's a new trend even coming up with a couple of scenarios, 2 different scenarios with here's a conservatively high interest rate that could cause a higher mill rate, or using a little bit more of an industry trend, which is again an assumption. They're making an estimate at that point in time what a more realistic interest rate might be.
And you think, pause there for a second, because I know the issue of publishing the mill rate is something that garnered some public concern. Can you comment, in your experience, the idea of publishing a mill rate, is that something that is common for a school district to do for something like this?
Yes.
And how common is it?
Yeah, thank you. So again, these are based on assumptions or different scenarios, estimates that we use. We work with Baird, our financial advisors. It is very common, in order to have as a part of a referendum presentation, the actual question or the wording of the question, which is the dollar amount of the debt issuance. It's very common to state an estimated interest rate, an estimated overall interest cost over the life of that issuance, disclose the term or the length of the debt issuance, even when it might be callable, when it could be refinanced. Those are all definitely things that should be disclosed. That being said, every single communication, so as an example, across the street from Superintendent Kirkegaard's office is the Badger electronic sign. And if we said on the day of the election, please get out and vote, it would not be common to have every communication disclose all of that information. What a lot of districts are now doing is creating websites dedicated to the referendum project, talking about the projects included, talking about all those financial terms and conditions that apply. Again, estimates, but based on those. So that's very common.
So as the superintendent who did a lot of the information last year, the part that was confusing to me was just like Andy said, in that if we say there's a referendum on Tuesday, go and vote, not telling them how to vote, do you need to have all of the financial information disclosed, or do you only need to disclose the financial information if you're talking about the cost of the referendum? And so from a superintendent's perspective, I like the change in that it certainly provides information to the public, not trying to hide anything, but if we're not talking about that it's a 40 million or 50 or 20 or whatever number it is referendum, it's just a referendum to do a new gymnasium, then you don't have to get into all of the specifics, because you're not talking about it's a $40 million referendum. You're just saying there's a referendum, and what we'd like to do is to redo the locker room at the high school, period. Or not even talk about the locker room at the high school, just tell them to go out and vote. And I was surprised that one of the past board members at our meeting said that his intent when they did the policy was, if you put on the billboard that says referendum on Tuesday, you should have all of those things included. And I thought I overreacted when I took it off of the marquee rather than, but according to his comments, we did exactly what should have been done, and that's taking it off, because you shouldn't talk about referendum period without all that other information.
Well, and I appreciate that perspective. One of the main concerns I had with the pre-existing policy is exactly that. You know, the idea that we want to strive to be as transparent as possible, yet we're not able to put on the school signs that today is a vote for a referendum. That really doesn't seem to be in the spirit of transparency at all. Instead, I'm afraid that inadvertently we created a compliance trap for ourselves. You know, reading the existing policy, I was, curious that, technically if the superintendent is emailing with Andy back and forth just normal questions about the referendum, do you have to disclose it to each other? I'm not sure. It just, I think the administration and the public deserve clarity on that. So I'd be curious to hear what the other committee members think about this.
If it's on a website, it can be updated on a regular basis. And, our last referendum process, if the board voted back in January to put a question on the ballot in April, a lot changes between January and April. We've obviously seen that in just the past month and a half with what's going on health-wise and how that's related to our economy. And so I think a website where your information can be updated if things change with interest rates and with assumptions and things is a good thing. And what turned out to be information we were posting and talking about in January would in fact had been different in April when the vote finally came around to vote on the referendum. I can't say with 100% certainty, but out of the 425 school districts in Wisconsin, not only can I not find a policy like this anywhere, I did ask WASB and I asked Quarles and Brady Law Office, and they are not aware of anyone in the state either. The gentleman who was at our prior board meeting who said New Berlin has a policy, that is not accurate. I looked at New Berlin's website. They are using Neola for policies. I talked to their school board president, who's been the president for the past 6 years, and she said that, to her knowledge, they have never had a policy like that in New Berlin, at least in the past 6 years that she's been on the board. So, if we keep with this type of policy, I like the fact that it's on the website and it can be updated. It can be as accurate as can be. And I also like the idea that we don't have to be too worried about the mailers and the signs that we put on our electronic signs simply saying, go vote or go educate yourself on the referendum. Here's a link to the website or whatever. So.
Great. Erin, any thoughts?
No, I totally agree with what Joel said. I think having a website that's easy to update and, maybe interactive with multiple options based on interest rate fluctuations, I think that's being extra transparent and easy to use and easy to find.
Referendums, as you know, Erin and Chris, let's say a $45 or a $35 million referendum passes. That doesn't mean we go to the bank the next day and borrow $35 million. You end up borrowing several chunks of money over a period of time. So unlike when we buy our houses and we lock in an interest rate. That's not how it works when you're building a new building or remodeling a high school or whatever. So I like the idea of putting just a ton of information on the website instead of trying to estimate and trying to lock in on what an interest cost is or an interest rate is, because you don't know, and that's not the way it works. And so on a website, you can put a ton of different assumptions, you can update those, and you can be just a heck of a lot more accurate with your information. And if that's not being transparent, I don't know what is.
Well, I agree. Andy, I guess from your perspective, we've looked at multiple ways to word this. Does administration have a preferred draft that we should be considering tonight?
Yeah, so I do apologize. Where I was just showing my screen here a few moments ago, that did take into consideration, Chris, your language that you proposed in addition to what I originally had. I like the organization of it a little bit better. I think it lends to the policy and that impact that it could have in sharing information with our community just a little bit better. So if you would be so inclined at some point where there's a first reading, I would make sure, and I actually just texted Jen Roush, if we can publish this document that I was just showing, get that up in our board docs tonight so folks can make sure they see it, change the file name so it's unique, but that's the language that I would recommend bringing forward.
Okay. Any objections to that? And again, this would come for a first reading, so there's going to be a lot of opportunity for review on the part of the board and on part of the public. So this isn't close to anything that's going to be fast-tracked, which is appropriate. We want to be sure this is a thoughtful decision.
Absolutely.
All right. Any objections to that on the part of the committee?
No.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see. Takes us to, make sure I got this right, item 8. Board Policy 34561, early graduation.
Yes, we had previously discussed this policy and then took it to the full board for consideration. And we had some discussion at the full board meeting. At that time, we decided to bring it back to policy. The area in which we were having most of the discussion at the full board meeting was in Roman numeral 2, citizenship. The recommendation is to strike through that. And we had some discussion at the board meeting about really about the question of if a student is truant or has just the idea of suspensions, detentions, things like that. Should we withhold the opportunity to graduate early? And so it's back here for for the policy committee to discuss prior to taking it back to the full board. Do you have questions about this?
So Don wants to interject for just a second. It really has to be, is early graduation a privilege or is it a action? Okay. And if it's an action, if you met the criteria, then you have the ability for early graduation. If it's a privilege, then we really have to be legally conscientious about, are we looking at discrimination based on, I'm going to prevent so-and-so from having early graduation because of a situation and not somebody else. And so it really becomes, is it, I have met the criteria, and the criteria is 23 credits or 22 credits or 24, whatever we have, it's this, this, and this. And as a result, I'm going to finish early from high school, okay? And if it's one semester early, it has no economic impact on the district because we get financial aid based on fall enrollment. If it's a full year's early, then it does because we're not educating them for their quote unquote senior year. But the real question for the policy committee is early graduation a privilege or is it a completion of the requirement? And if it's a completion of the requirement, then I think you have a difficult time saying, I'm going to let Joel do it and not Chris, or Andy can graduate, but not Laura.
And this may be a silly question, but are these, under the citizenship section, are any of those criteria that would prevent someone from normally graduating at normal time?
Laura, the answer is no.
Correct. The answer is no.
The other part is, and I'm not saying it can't happen, but the reality is that if I have significant suspensions, detentions, tardiness, whatever, and the likelihood of having the opportunity for early graduation might not be as prevalent as you think. I mean, it can happen, certainly it can, but typically the students who are going to be in trouble based on citizenship aren't necessarily the ones who are applying for early graduation, okay? And if they are, maybe the best thing for them is to go to a different environment that's not as restrictive as the one we have in school. And so that if you have all of those things in the past and you're still able to make it to the point where you can graduate early, are we accomplishing anything by keeping them here as opposed to letting them go early? I mean, that really is the question for the board.
If it was something where there were a number of those factors from citizenship, would that be touched on when the counselor is reviewing it and the superintendent is approving it?
For Don, the answer is no.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not saying it wouldn't be for the counselor, but for Don, when it comes over to me, Laura reviews them, make sure that we have everything, comes to me for signature. If you have the necessary credits and you are done at semester time, I'm not denying anybody based on the current citizenship criteria. If you're eligible, you're eligible, and I'll let you go. That's currently what happens.
Okay.
And frankly, if someone was having trouble with truancy and when they were here, there were suspensions, the counselor might talk to them about the opportunity to graduate early and have them consider, along with their parent, if that was really in their best interest.
Okay.
And so.
Other thoughts, questions?
I don't have any recommended changes to the policy that is the way it's currently written and the way it's currently strike through. I think graduation is you meet the requirements, you can graduate. I don't think of it as a privilege, but it's like superintendent said, is you meet the requirements, you graduate. So.
Right. I agree. Okay.
So then seeing that this would come back for first reading again, correct? Or does it come back for second? I think it comes back for second reading because it's already had the first.
I think it comes back for second reading because it's had the first.
Laura, I think in this particular case, you'd have to look at the minutes, but I think we took it out of first reading because we had some uncertainty. I don't know if we really, and maybe it is second reading, but I think maybe based on the discussion that we had that night, it's been 3 months ago already, that we say, we're going to break it back to the drawing board and look it over again and see it. So you have to look and see, but it might be first again.
Okay, well, we'll take a look at those minutes, and then, for the policy committee, then either it'll be first or second, depending on what the word,
What the minutes reflect. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for that. All right. That takes us to, I think, the last item on our agenda, which is policy 187, public participation at board meetings. And I asked that this come back just to run this by the committee, because I know there was a lot of discussion at the board level. I think there were a couple of items. I mean, first of all, on the public side, there was some concern with regard to, do the comments need to be limited to the agenda? There were a number of what I thought were very positive changes around during this period of time where we're all working and living remotely, to be able to participate by email. but I think we've had some time to reflect on this since then. And correct me if I'm wrong, if we make changes to this policy, if you accommodated by saying, if you want to publicly participate, you would do just like you did pre-COVID-19, that is, show up to the district office, fill out a comment card. There will be a terminal, a microphone provided for you to make your public comment. And so we're not shutting people off. I guess my question is, are we okay with that as a committee? Because if that is the case, then we don't need to do anything. If we think there are some changes that need to be made or tweaked to this for another go, well, then we should talk about that as well. So I guess I'd turn it over for thoughts from our committee or from administration.
I can go first. I'm sitting in the ESC right now because I'm going to go downstairs at 5:30 for our board meeting to see if anybody from the public wants to show up to address the board tonight and follow our current policy as it's written, where somebody can come in, fill out a card, hand it over to the board president, and then, like you said, Chris, they'll be called to the mic and asked to speak. You know, the email thing, you know, I'm kind of mixed on it because we had 10 or 12 emails last week, and a handful of those came from people who don't typically come to address the board. However, they have the opportunity to email any of the board members or administrators at any time of day, 24/7. All of our emails and phone numbers are posted on our district website. And so if you want to email the board, go ahead and do it anytime you want. Why does it have to be during a public participation of the board meeting? And so the other piece is when we're back to meeting as a board in person in the boardroom, are we going to start getting requests for people who want to send emails to be read out loud as opposed to coming in person? So I don't know. I mean, the current policy has served us well. Several of the people who wrote to us at our last meeting obviously mentioned that. And so I'm not opposed to just keeping it the way it is. And if people want to come talk and address the board during a public board meeting, then they're going to need to show up, fill out a card, and be called to the podium, just like our current policy says. And if you can't come at that 5:30 on April 27th or whatever scheduled time these meetings are, then you can email the board at any time of day, 24/7. So.
Great. Erin, any thoughts?
I guess I like that. It has been working. My only, I guess, concern is the current policy reads that the board president will be there to get the cards. I guess I'm just thinking, like, in this virtual setting, if Joel couldn't be there, or whoever the board president is could not be there in person because they're sick or, you know, they're locked down or whatever the situation is there someone else that can do that without the policy being changed?
Erin, I thought that same thing, because if you're reading it word for word, it says you turn that comment card over to the board president. Can you do that virtually? Can you take a comment card and walk up to the screen and turn it over to somebody virtually?
Or if you can't be there, can the vice president be there or some other board member perhaps? Does it have to be the president?
Yeah, and in our officer policy, that is the role of the vice president, is to act and fill in for the president, especially during meetings when the president can't be there. So I guess we could refer to that officer policy. But does that mean just anybody? No, that means either the president's there, or if not the president, then the vice president. So
okay.
What are your thoughts?
I myself have gone back and forth on this. Here's my thought. Perhaps we let the policy rest the way it is for right now and see how does it work over the next month or so. I think in the meantime, I think, Aaron, it would be a good idea for us to really scrub it through to make sure that we're not, creating, again, some sort of technical trap for ourselves if the board president isn't there, but the vice president or the clerk is. But it sounds like we're not going to rush forward, make any changes. We've got a process in place for right now. Let's see how it goes. But we'll scrub this through to make sure that that in this virtual world we can still accomplish this by the showing up in person, the comment cards, and providing a terminal for them to make comments. Would that be okay for the committee?
I'm good with that.
Yeah, I'm good with that. And that part where it says turn the comment card over to the board president, the board president will call you to the podium. You could put in there board president or designee, which is a little phrase we use with our administrators a lot in different policies. But obviously the way that the policy stands, not only does the public have to show up here, somebody from the board obviously has to show up here too. And if we ever got to a point where the governor tells us that this building is absolutely closed, nobody can be in here, well, then we'll really be in a problem at that point, I guess you could say. But for now, we're not. So, we'll see how it goes tonight. We'll see if anyone shows up and keep it the way it is.
So I think for tonight it makes sense, and for me it makes sense as well. If we have an extended virtual program, if you truly want some input, I think you need to do what was proposed last meeting, okay? Not necessarily strictly to the agenda items, but what you have in red probably is the way you want to go down the road. But that's only if this is a extended period of time. And then I think you'd also want to make sure that its guidelines is very specific, is only for virtual board meetings. So when we come back and we don't have a virtual board meeting, we truly, then it has to be face-to-face. But as long as you're doing virtual, and we're hoping that this is sooner rather than longer, we're back to face-to-face. But if we have a relapse and next year we have another 4 months or 5 months, you really probably are going to want to take a look at that and give people an opportunity. With that in mind, and it's kind of this topic, but not really. And so whoever is the new board president after tonight, in May, I'm proposing that we take public comments on the requirement for the number of hours for the school year, okay? In order for us to get a waiver from the Department of Education, the governor said all of them will be approved, but you have to take public comments at a board meeting for that to happen. It's not a meeting of the electorate. It's just public comments on that proposed resolution, okay? And I'll work with the new board president or the old board president or whoever the board president is, so he or she and I can get together. And so I'm going to suggest that in that particular case, we're going to take public comments maybe through Friday or Thursday of the week before the May 11th board meeting, so that we can try to get those posted as well in advance, and then they can do some additional comments that day. They'll do virtual comments as opposed to face-to-face, but this is not part of our public participation. This is public comments based on the statute that we have to have a public meeting or public input on that proposed change. Does that make sense?
So it's public comment, it's not a public vote or anything like that.
It is the board's decision when it's all said and done. You can have 427 comments that say you should make up 3 more weeks of school. If the board says, no, we're not going to make up 3 more weeks of school, that's a board decision, but it does require a public hearing, public comments before you make that decision.
And are we going to allow or request the public do that through email as well as public, like the main meeting?
I think you almost, that's what I'll visit with the board president. I think you almost need to, and if we can get them in advance, we'll post them so that the rest of the public, the rest of the board members can see those emails before, that we wouldn't necessarily read them off the way you read them off last time. We maybe put them into 4 different categories or 3 or however many different categories we have and go from there.
Okay.
All right, sounds good. Okay, I think we've reached then the last item on our agenda. Is there any other business to come before the committee at this time? Hearing none, any objections to adjourning? Okay,
Thank you, Chris.
we are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Take care.